Welcome back to another episode of Warren Cali. In this episode, I'm going to detail the story of the P.J. Watts Crips. Named after Charles H. Watts in 1926, the incorporated city of Watts voted to annex itself with the city of Los Angeles. It was settled by mostly white and Mexican Americans who worked on a railroad. But gradually, Watts became an almost black neighborhood going into the 1960s. During World War II, the Jordan Downs, the Imperial Courts, and the Nickerson Garden housing projects were built, the Nickerson Gardens being the largest project of all. These projects will later birth such gangs as the Grape Street Crips, the P.J. Watts Crips, and the Bounty Hunter Blood Gang. The Imperial Courts projects was built in 1944 in Watts and was part of a major social housing development and attracted many African Americans from southern states. The black community of Watts went through a lot of harassment by police officers and lack of public services, such as hospitals and schools. This led to a lot of hostility in the urban community. Violence in Watts erupted when a black youth was arrested for a DUI by a CHP officer, which led to him being beat by police among a crowd. This sparked an outrage in Watts as a community, leading to the now infamous Watts Riot in 1965. This also led to 6 days of civil unrest, motivated by the allegations of police abuse. Nearly 14,000 members of the California Army National Guard helped suppress the riots, which resulted in 34 deaths, as well as over $40 million in property damage. The 1970s did not fare well for the Watts community either. When Bloods and Crips rivalry took over the area, each of the 3 major gangs in Watts was born out of separate housing projects. Like I said before, the Nickerson Garden housing projects gave birth to the Bounty Hunter Bloods, and the Jordan Down projects gave birth to the Grape Streets, and the Imperial Courts birthed the P.J. Watts Crips. So obviously, whatever area you grew up in determined which gang you were from or ended up being affiliated with. And the rest of Watts would follow suit, with numerous other Crip and Blood gangs in other areas. The P.J. Watts Crips will become one of the deadliest gangs in Watts, and arguably the second largest Crip gang in the area. And by the 80s, they would embark in several wars with other gangs in nearby areas, and Watts would become one of the most violent areas in the whole LA. The PJs would go to war with the Grape Street Crips and the Bounty Hunter Bloods, which their beef would calm down, with them both having a bigger hate for the Grape Street Crips. They would even beef for other gangs. The PJs and the Grape Streets were on good terms until around 1987, when a conflict between the two happened, and that leads us to the beef they still have today. The PJs would even go to war with several Compton Crip gangs, like the Carver Park Compton Crips and the Mona Park Compton Crips, among several other Watts gangs that they beef with. For many years, it would be many attempts to make a truce among the gangs in Watts, but in April of 1992, Crips and Bloods in Watts began to negotiate peace. During the early 1990s in LA, the black community was going through a lot. In 1991, Rodney King was beat by police, and in that same year, a young black girl named Latasha Harlan will be shot and killed by an Asian store owner. I covered Latasha Harlan's story in a previous episode, but another shocking death will happen, and it happened in 1992. A man named Henry will be shot and killed by LAPD during a blackout in the Imperial Courts housing project. Events like this will bring many of the gangs together. The initial gangs involved will be the Grape Street Crips, the P.J. Watts Crips, and the Bounty Hunter Bloods, and also the Hacienda Village Bloods. They agreed to cease fire officially on April 28, 1992. Representatives from these 4 gangs signed a formal peace treaty out of Mosque and Watts. Within days of the truce, despite relative lawlessness caused by the 1992 LA riots, most African American gangs in the city declared themselves at peace, and there was no major flare-ups in violence. The Watts truce is generally credited with contributing to the trend in declining street violence in LA, and many gangs throughout LA would cease fire. But this will only last so long, and many gangs went back to beefing, and that included the PJs. Tony Bogard was from the PJs and was widely recognized as one of the leaders of the 1992 Watts gang truce between the Bloods and the Crips. Tony Bogard was well known by celebrities and also appeared on the Oprah show in 1993. In 1994, Tony got into a deadly confrontation with Rodney Compton, a reputable member of the P.J. Watts Crips as well, which led to a shootout in the parking lot at the Imperial Courts. Tony was struck by 6 bullets and died at the scene. Rapper Draysta, the older brother of B.G. Knockout, was also shot in the crossfire, and Draysta was in critical condition. He was placed in the ICU, but managed to survive. Rodney Compton was charged with first-degree murder, but pled no contest to 1 count of voluntary manslaughter. Tony Bogard would go down as a legend in Watts, are his contributions to the cause. Outside of the streets, the Imperial Courts became known in media for being in shows and movies. Parts of movie Training Day was filmed in the Imperial Courts, and the P.J. Watts Crips was also featured on the A&E TV show Peacemaker, the LA Gang Wars, an attempt to settle differences between the P.J. Watts and the Fudgetown Mafia Crips. The Imperial Courts will also appear in movies like Imperial Dreams and a documentary called Catching Hell and the City of Angels. And in recent years, you can see many rappers popping up in the area of Watts and also the Imperial Courts. You can even see a video of Justin Bieber pulling up to the PJs.
Right here, man. Justin Bieber in the hood, cuz. White boy. Seen that shit.
Holding back the faces I would make. I'm a fan of you're the rock star, making it hard on me. Visualize a monster, cause you're too bad for me. Shot that arrow, I'm hit. Need you right near me. I try to maintain, so don't mind if I turn away. Yeah.
Okay.
5,
6,
house shoes,
7,
my little homie.
8,
It's them hot shoes, man.
You push it like everybody else. House shoes on at the 12. Push it.
15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Okay, show out.
Justin Bieber.
But with that being said, let's get into some cases. Michael was from the East Coast Crips, and his baby mama Yumika lived in the Imperial Courts with their 6 kids. In January 2011, Michael was walking through the Imperial Courts on his way to see his kids when a man approached him and started banging on him. He asked Michael where was he from and where was he going. He also asked Michael who did he know in the area. Michael's response was that he had been in and out the projects and wasn't a threat to nobody. Michael's kids were close by, so he didn't want to get aggressive. The man then asked Michael, did your kids like living here? And Michael got ready to fight because he took this as an indirect threat to his family. The man then walked away. Michael and his kids and his baby mama were sitting outside, and Michael's kids yelled, "Dad, here he comes again." Michael told Yumika to take his kids inside the house. Michael walked toward the man, and the man told Michael, "This is your last chance. Get up out of here." Michael's response was, "Do what you gotta do." This would lead to multiple shots being fired at Michael. The first shot hit Michael in the ear, where he began to bleed, and the following shots hit him in the stomach. The shooting was captured on camera, and the P.J. Watt member named Ron was later arrested. Michael refused to testify, but others at the scene did. This shooting got Ron 15 years to life. Marquise was a member of the P.J. Watts Crips on the evening of September 23, 2013. Marquise was visiting his girlfriend in her apartment in Imperial Courts. Around 7:35 p.m., Marquise walked out of the apartment and several gunshots rang out. Marquise's girlfriend looked outside the window and saw 3 men get into a minivan, and she saw one of the men put a weapon into his waistband. Before the minivan drove off, she heard one of the men yell Grape Street. Marquise had been shot 6 times, and a gunshot wound to his head was fatal. The same 3 men were responsible for a shooting in the Bounty Hunter Blood's turf. They killed a Bounty Hunter Blood rapper named Flipside. This was all revenge after a Grape Street Crip was shot. After camera footage from both shootings was released, the shooters were easily arrested. Grape Street Crip members Kev, Marvin, and Chris were all sentenced to life. Every hood has internal beef, and just like what I mentioned before in 1994, when Tony Bogart died from the hands of another P.J. Watts Crip, this next case is about internal beef. Deshaun grew up in the Imperial Courts housing project with 2 of his cousins, Mark and DeAndre. Mark was killed in 2005, and rumor on the street that it was another P.J. Watts Crip named KB. Deshaun and DeAndre would do several years in prison, so they were never able to get revenge for Mark, but by 2015, they were both free. In August of 2015, KB was staying in the Imperial Courts with his cousin. KB's cousin Frances heard him screaming outside one day, and she looked outside, and KB looked like he saw a ghost. KB said that Deshaun had been chasing him with an AK-47. Frances looked outside her home again and saw 5 men standing at the end of her block. About a week later, around 9:30 p.m. on August 15, 2015, DeAndre and his girlfriend were in the parking lot of the Imperial Courts. KB approached him and said something disrespectful about DeAndre's girlfriend. DeAndre and Deshaun would then have a talk on the phone about the situation. Deshaun then pulled up to Imperial Courts and pulled up to the area that they was in. Deshaun got out of his car and ran across the parking lot with a gun. He approached KB around 9:45. KB was standing with a group of people, and after a brief back and forth, KB would say, "You gonna do me like this?" Deshaun then gave a warning to the crowd and counted to 3. He told everybody they better move. Deshaun then opened fire, killing KB and wounding another person. With all the witnesses at the scene, Deshaun was soon arrested. This shooting got Deshaun 103 years to life. On January 27, 2018, there was a candlelight vigil for a man named Daryl. Daryl died in a car accident. The vigil took place in an apartment complex in Apple Valley. Ronald and Robert were documented members of the PJ Crips, and they both knew Daryl, and they attended the vigil. At the vigil, Robert introduced himself to everybody. He introduced himself to a man named Tyrell and said, "What's up? I'm Bob from PJ's." Tyrell's brother Josh was drunk, and he was acting a fool. Ronald and Josh exchanged words, and Ronald knocked Josh out. Ronald yelled out, "That's why I knocked you out." Tyrell stood up for his brother, and Ronald yelled out PJ Watts and punched Tyrell in the eye. This led to a group of people fighting. Several people began to jump Ronald, and some yelled disses to PJ's. Ronald was getting jumped, and Robert tried to break up the fight, but he couldn't get to Ronald. Robert then went to his car, retrieved his gun, and started shooting in the crowd to get everybody off Ronald. Robert shot 4 people, but nobody died. With so many witnesses at the scene, Robert was easily identified. He will receive 40 years for the shooting. On March 10th, 2019, 2 men, Khalees and AB, were driving through the Imperial Courts housing projects. They were sitting at a stop sign when a white car pulled alongside of them and started firing multiple shots. Khalees was the driver, and he would die from the shooting. AB would be injured, but he survived. The whole shooting will be captured on camera footage and showed a dark car passing a group of people in front of the Imperial Courts projects. A man named Ezekiel was later arrested on a drug charge, and he began to run his mouth. He wanted to get released, so he mentioned the March 10 murder. He said he knew the shooter and said the shooter was bragging about it. The shooter was a man from PJ Watts' Crip named Chapo. Chapo was later arrested, and he would receive life for the shooting. Pat was at a barbecue in a park located in the territory of the Carver Park Compton Crips. Members of the gang were at the barbecue as well. Demetrius, a member of the PJ Watts Crips, was standing near a gate at the park. Approximately 20 minutes later, Johnny arrived at the barbecue and started talking to her cousin Pat. As the 2 women were about to leave, shots would ring out. Johnny would be hit by the gunfire, and she would later die. Witnesses would say they saw Demetrius running from the area and when they heard the gunshots. Police arrested Demetrius hiding a few blocks from the murder scene. He was not carrying a gun, but one unfired bullet was in his pocket. And the bullet that was found in Demetrius' pockets had been in the same gun as the shell casings the police found at the murder scene. Demetrius will be sentenced to life for the shooting. The PJ Watts Crips beef for other gangs was still going non-stop, and by late July of 2023, a pair of shootings in Watts killed 2 people and injured 7, and both shootings happened near the Imperial Courts and the nearby Jordan Down housing projects. On July 16, 2023, a gunman killed a man named Rashawn and injured 4 other people near an Imperial Courts parking lot. On July 29th, a gunman opened fire on a group of people who were watching a sporting event at the Jordan Down housing projects. Police said Kamante, a 19-year-old, was killed and 3 others were injured. Days later, multiple members of the PJ Watts Crips tried to pull up and kill members of Grape Street in the Jordan Down housing projects, but this didn't go as planned, and the PJ members ended up getting killed themselves. The Grape Street members would make fun of this, and this would go viral. With all this going on, you can see the beef that the PJ Watts Crips in is real, and it's probably never ending. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.